So we are working on quadratics, and the big thing to notice when we're solving equations with quadratics, we have these x squared. So we have a power raised to the second power in our variables. So those are the types of problems that are called quadratics. And we're going to solve using a method called factoring. When we are solving by factoring, what we are going to do is we are going to first set your equation equal to 0. We're going to use this thing called the zero product property, which says that if you multiply two numbers and you get the answer of 0, that means one of your two numbers has to be 0. So we're going to use those ideas about zeros to help us solve these out. After you set it equal to 0, number 2, you're going to factor your quadratic. And lastly, you're going to set each factor equal to 0. So we'll go through each of those processes in the rest of that white space to the right there, so you can kind of see each step moving forward. So taking a peek back at our quadratic, we've got x squared plus 3x plus 8 equals negative 3x plus 3. So the one big problem here is for me to use that zero product property is I got to get this right side set equal to 0. So I'm going to get anything that's over on that side moved over to the left side. So really quick, we're going to add 3x. Over here, we're going to add 3x. Then we're going to subtract 3. Subtract 3. So now this is what it will look like. X squared plus 6x plus 5 equals to 0. So there's step number 1. Get your quadratic set equal to 0. Now next, we look at how we're going to factor it. So the one big thing I'm noticing is this thing has 3 terms. Whenever it has 3 terms, it's going to factor into 2 binomials. So that's going to be the setup of what it looks like when it's factored. It's going to have x plus something equals 0. So I'm getting that trinomial into 2 binomials. The next thing I'm looking at is this very first term is a 1 right here. Anytime this is a 1x squared or just an x squared, that means that my first terms are going to be x and x. So I'm going to fill that in next. So I got x and x. Now I'm just doing a little number riddle. Whenever I just have that x squared in the front, there's a pattern. The pattern is that the two numbers that I'm going to fill in my binomial need to multiply. They're always going to multiply to this last term and then add to this middle term. So I'm thinking of two numbers that fill both of these categories. Multiply to 5, add to 6. You guys think of two numbers that multiply to 5 and then they also add 6. So what two numbers could multiply to 5 first? 5 and 1, and then 5 and 1, do those two numbers add 6? 5 plus 1? Yes, so we're going to have x plus 1, x plus 5, either order. So there's your two factors. So this comes from FOIL. If we would FOIL this out, our first terms are going to be x squared, our last terms are going to be 5. Our middle terms are 1x and 5x, so that's going to make 6x. So that's going to be where we're using that number riddle. What multiplies to the last term adds to the middle term. Now lastly, you're going to set each factor equal to 0. So to recap, we've done step 1, we've done step 2, now we're on to step 3, which is going to be x plus 1 equals 0, x plus 5 equals 0. Now a lot of times you can just do this mentally. So what number plus 1 is going to equal 0? Negative 1. What number plus 5 is going to equal 0? Negative 5. So you'll start to notice that the answers are just kind of the opposite of those numbers you used to factor. So now I'm ready to put in my answers. I've got a negative 1, negative 5. The other thing you're going to notice about quadratics is you're always going to get 2 answers. Quadratics are to the second power, which means you're always going to get 2 solutions. I need to erase that, so we'll have that on this video if you need it later. But our two solutions then are -5, and then you hit a comma, -1. So to put in two solutions, hit the comma. And if you wanted to, you could keep hitting the comma button and add more solutions, but we're always just going to have two. So there's our answer. Hopefully we got it. And there it is. So you can see their work. Set equal to 0, trinomial factoring, set factors to 0. So there's our step 1, our step 2, our step 3, and then we solve it. So we'll take a look at one more. Okay, this one's going to be just a little different. Next, we get it set equal to 0. I'm going to show my work over here. We're going to end up getting x squared plus 7x equals 0. So I subtract that 5 over, and I get x squared plus 7x equals 0. So I didn't show my algebra to you up here, but if I did, I'd subtract this 5. 5 and minus 5 are going to equal to 0. So that 5 is just going to cancel out. Now I take a look at starting to factor. When I'm factoring, I'm always paying attention to how many terms does my quadratic have. So you look up and you count, how many terms does this one have? 1, 2. The ones with 3 trinomials, those will factor into the two binomials like this. But when we only have 2 terms, unless it's a difference of squares, we will have a different type of factoring. Here, we're going to factor using what's called the GCF. So we talked about this on day 1 as well. So we're looking for a common factor that divides both the x squared term and the x term. When we're looking for the GCF, we look for a number first. So this has a 1 in front of it. 1 and 7 don't have any factors in common. But here I have an x squared. So this has an x and an x, and this one has 1x. So they both share at least one x in common. So I'm going to factor out the x. So x comes out in front. Each term is divided by x, which x squared divided by x becomes x. 7x divided by x becomes 7. And then that equals 0. Now I've got my two factors. I'm going to set x equal to 0, and I'm going to set x plus 7 equal to 0. And just like before, we do some mental math. This one's going to be 0. It's already solved. This one's going to be -7. So there would be my two solutions. So checking the variables, x squared and x are part of both of those terms. So I have a common x that I can divide out of both of those. Then I'll head to my answer. We'll put in a 0, comma, and a -7. And there's our result. So set equal to 0, find the greatest common factor, set the factors equal to 0, and so on. I'm just going to look for one thing here. Here we go. The last thing that we can see is what's called a difference of squares. So we'll look at this last one. We'll add the 6x over. So again, I'm not going to show the algebra, but you would add 6x over and you'd get x squared minus 49 equals to 0. So now you look at your quadratic on the left side. It's x squared minus 49. And you ask yourself, how many terms does that quadratic have? X squared minus 49. It's got x squared, which is one term, 49, there's your second term. Now these are special quadratics that factor, even though they only have 2 terms, they are going to factor into 2 binomials. These are called difference of squares. And the key thing you're looking for is this 49. There's something special about 49. What happens when you square root 49? What do you get? You get a 7. The difference of squares, x squared minus 49, will factor into x plus that square root, and then x minus whatever that square root is. So we're going to get x plus 7, x minus 7, is going to equal to 0. So when you see a perfect square, so like 9 or 16 or 25 or 49 or 36, any type of number that's square roots, that's going to factor into a difference of squares. If you FOIL that out, you'll get x squared plus 7x minus 7x minus 49. Well, plus 7 minus 7, what's going to happen with those two? They're going to cancel out. So that's going to be how they factor. So x plus 7, x minus 7. Now we set each of them equal to 0. We're going to get negative 7, positive 7. There's going to be our two solutions. So we get to the end there. Once we get our two factors, we can, most of the time, 90% of the time, just do some mental math. Figure out, okay, what number would make that factor 0? What number would make the other factor 0? Now we can find those two solutions. So our two solutions were negative 7 and hit my comma, positive 7. There's going to be our answer. Okay, so I will save that video to